Hey, we're live! Welcome to Dive into World Building. I'm Juliet Wade, and I'm here with my two friends, and hopefully one more person who will be coming. We're starting a little late today because of technical issues, because I really like to be able to hear the people who are participating in the Hangouts. Hangout almost kicked me out today, so, you know, there you go. But today's topic is really fun, and Deborah is actually representing for the topic today with breakfast.
And one of the cool things about my breakfast,
yeah, and Deborah is actually representing for the topic today. Oh my goodness, do we have now an echo?
Yeah,
like a long time delay one too.
My breakfast, yeah, is that how much of my breakfast I grew myself.
Oh my goodness, do we have now an echo? That's cool. Yeah. So we're gonna have to ignore the echo, I guess. Even though it's going to try to talk over us.
How much of my breakfast I grew myself.
Anyway, okay, so when I started brainstorming about food, before the echo, I came up with like a million subtopics, and so I could tell this is going to be a topic that we're going to come back to over and over. But growing food, processing food, transporting food, making food, eating food, tools for making food, TV shows about food, culture surrounding food, eating disorders, people's relationships with food, how you define meals. I mean, okay, so this is like the hugest topic ever.
Alternatives to food.
Alternatives to food, okay.
What if your people are plants and they photosynthesize?
Okay. I'm glad we started with that because that's not usually where we go with this. Food, okay.
What if your people are plants and they photosynthesize?
Oh no, okay. The echo is really annoying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm really having trouble following the conversation.
Is that like, maybe if we all mute or something, or
Yeah.
Okay,
the echo is really annoying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm really having trouble.
Deborah, do you think maybe it might be something from your audio?
Maybe if we all mute or something, or
something from your audio?
Oh.
This is interesting.
I think it's Deborah.
Deborah, I think it might be your audio that's causing the echo. Do you happen to have a pair of headphones? Whoa! Crossing fingers. Because boy, those echoes are seriously distracting.
Okay. Muted, unmuted. I'm now wearing headphones. Let's see.
I'm not hearing the echo yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I will try talking.
It was echoing everybody before, and I think we've gotten rid of it. Thank you, Deborah. That was very, very kind of you. Thank you for going to the trouble. So tell us about your garden and what you grew yourself, Deborah, because let's start with Deborah's breakfast.
You know what? I'm still hearing an echo, but let's try. Okay. Yeah, I'm having oatmeal, which I cannot grow, with raisins, which I cannot grow. I can grow, but these raisins didn't come from my garden. But apples, which I harvested last fall and froze, and rhubarb, which I harvested a couple of days ago.
Awesome, and I am very impressed, and I know a lot about your garden, and I'm trying to see if I can actually get on headphones.
So one of the ways this applies to food and world building is that at least on our planet, Most food is seasonal as well as cultural. And the methods available for preserving the food vary from one economic status to another. We have a freezer, which allows me to harvest at one time and eat that food throughout the year.
I suspect you guys can't hear me if I'm on the...
Now I can.
See, I just pulled my... See, these things don't... Problem is I'm not used to using headphones, and so I don't know how to get the microphone to work. And I would rather not spend the time, but if we still have a terrible echo, Deborah, I don't know what to say. This could put a damper on this fantastic topic. Am I still echoing when I'm not on the headphones, Deborah?
I don't hear an echo.
Yeah, none of the rest of us are getting an echo.
Odd.
Well, I mean, the only other alternative that I can think of is trying to get out of the Hangout and start it again and see if that irons something out, because I can't, my son's headphones are not working. Is everybody's voice echoing, Deborah, or just mine? Oh, well, that might work.
Yeah, that fixes it sometimes.
Yeah, I restarted.
Okay. Yeah, Morgan got her audio to work. So hopefully, shoot. So hopefully, if Deborah goes out and comes back.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. Storing
Yeah,
food. I didn't even think of storing food.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
Huge deal. Preserving food.
That's how you get plagues of mice. They get in your granaries.
Oh my gosh, yes, and protecting it from vermin.
Cats. Need cats.
Locusts come and eat your crops.
Yep.
And I mean, like 99%, like it's like so much of your time, like in what people I guess would call like primitive or early cultures or pre-technology. Most, like a fair amount of your time is spent simply gathering and processing food so you have enough calories to make it to the end of the day to start all over again.
You spend a lot of your day just trying to feed yourself.
Yeah, and your family and everyone, and hopefully everyone's cooperating.
Yeah. Even if you're not, I mean, not even if you're gathering, but if you're food gathering, but also if you're I mean, farming.
Yep, raising animals, farming crops.
Hunting and trapping.
Yep, hunting, trapping, all that has to be done. And it's all time consuming.
Yep, so if you're in fiction and you have a situation where you're not spending a ton of your time getting your food together. Hi, Deborah. I hope it's better.
Hi. So far, no echo.
Yay! Yay! Let's just cross our fingers. So we had started kind of running through this list, and I actually think this is a good list of all the things that you can do related to food, and obviously we're not going to be able to go in depth into each one of them. But you mentioned food storage, Deborah, which was a really good point. And so I mentioned preserving food, and now we are talking about how much time you spend in the day preparing your food, or gathering your food if you have to gather your food, or farming for your food if you have to farm for your food.
Food acquisition.
It's a major proposition. A lot of people don't, think about food very much. I mean, you can have large populations of people in a culture like ours who just don't know how to cook food. And then, whenever they're hungry, they either buy something that's pre-processed from the store, or they just go out to some place where other people will make food for them. I mean, these people do exist, right? But it's, there are so many layers of civilization and technology that have to be layered on top of one another for people like that to continue to survive. Right?
Right.
It's
That's a social issue. If I didn't have my husband and child, I would be eating out of boxes and cans and the occasional burnt toast and dried out eggs. Because if I'm recalling correctly, that's pretty much the
for
occasional
others
decent food. But so that's a social aspect to food.
Yeah, I think it's social and it's financial. That pattern is very common in poor people, and they live in food deserts where even if they knew how to cook fresh, healthy food, fruits and vegetables and fresh fish and stuff like that, aren't available to them. What's available to them are things in cans or things in boxes and convenience stores and fast food places.
Yeah.
And then that cycles into health problems as a result. One of the most interesting things I think has happened in response to that is urban agriculture. Where vacant lots are being turned into community gardens, and people are gardening on the roofs of skyscrapers, and it pots on their porches and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
We have about we have a third of an acre, and about 1,700 square feet is under cultivation. We're limited because my husband has a lot of dietary restrictions. So we're not doing anything from the onion family. We're not doing any cruciferous vegetables. But I am amazed at how much food we can produce. And we don't do grains. But we have 5 fruit trees, 2 of which have grafts of about 5 other varieties. And there is no season that we are not getting some kind of fresh produce. Even if it's just like before it warmed up, we were getting the last of the kale and miner's lettuce. So we got fresh greens all winter. But we're in Central Coast, California. So if we were in Alaska, the situation would be different.
Right.
I don't know where I went with that. Sorry, I ran away with it.
No, you can grow stuff year-round, and there are places you can grow stuff year-round, but so many places are
You
not.
guys have lots of asparagus, too. I know that. Deborah.
All right.
It's not just the climate, but the climate change. The farmers around here, central New York, used to be pretty reliable. You'd harvest your fall crop and get ready for the winter. The snow would come, the snow would go in spring, and not in February, and come back in April. And so the plants would be okay. They wouldn't be confused about what they were responding to.
Yeah.
So that's a thing that might change things if you have to move from one place to another to find an environment is not just hospitable but consistently hospitable to farming, which is the thing I just thought of, the same way that you might follow a herd so that you could get to the hunting and the trapping as they migrate.
Yep.
That's new.
I just read Shay's comment about having food allergies and having to make things from scratch. Was sort of like my husband doesn't have allergies, but it's sort of the watchword in our household. But that makes me think of creating a world where some of the people can't eat the dominant food crops.
Mm-hmm.
You could do wonderful things with a caste system, or separate communities, or maybe prejudice for or against people who say can't eat wheat or whatever it is.
Actually, yeah, I was thinking about it myself because I have friends who are celiac sufferers,
Mm-hmm.
and just like even the tiniest, and I mean like tiniest cross contamination is like poison to them, right? And I was thinking, what if you had a population on a world where there were these populations, but they couldn't share food,
Mm-hmm.
Because how would you have social relationships in a situation where you couldn't share food because it would kill you, right? Yeah, because food is so social for us in so many cases.
Right, the whole idea of sharing food, of bread and salt, is what you offer somebody new in the neighborhood, and that actually still goes on today, although perhaps not the salt, but I've had that happen to me twice, I think, that I can think of, when I was new in a neighborhood and when neighbors brought me a loaf of homemade bread.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That
Yeah,
would
we
be
got
interesting if
cookies.
I was celiac.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, right? You'd be like, oh, thanks, I'll just use somebody else and touch it.
Well, what if you have the culture, a separate culture where everyone is celiac, and you move into a neighborhood where you're moving into a neighborhood that isn't, you're entirely your group. It's, a mixed neighborhood. And your neighbor comes and brings you a loaf of bread, and because that's what they do to be hospitable and welcoming. And yeah, we used to do that when I was a kid. And there was new families in the neighborhood. It was a developing neighborhood. But what if somebody brought that to you? Is that what, do you want us to leave? Are you trying to kill us?
Mm.
Yeah.
What's that? Because we talked in another dive about what constitutes welcoming, and another culture clash, which unfortunately I can't remember.
It was the hospitality.
Yes.
Yeah. In Japan, when you move into a neighborhood, you're supposed to give the people in the neighborhood a gift of soba noodles.
Huh.
Because soba means buckwheat, but it also means nearby.
Mm.
Wow! Oh, that is so cool!
Isn't it cute? So you say, "Hi, I am now nearby. Have some noodles." Yeah. I always thought that was really cool.
So how the gift of inedible food is received depends in part on whether the food is appropriate in the dominant culture or not.
Mm-hmm.
So here Morgan and I are sort of talking about, and Che, about what you do if you're celiac and somebody hands you a plate of cookies that they bake just for you. But in the larger culture, this is appropriate. But in a culture of celiac people, it would be like, oh my God, who is this crazy person?
Yeah, like why would they go to the trouble of doing this openly?
Yeah, right.
That is very strange. Actually, I was just talking with a friend of mine, and she had this fabulous idea. Okay, she's my friend who is a gluten-free baker, and she's amazing. But she was saying to me, and the idea of community where people couldn't eat, gluten brought this to mind because she was like, whenever you go to a gluten-free restaurant or establishment, it's always about eating the things that that would ordinarily have gluten in them.
Yes.
Right?
Bread and pasta and whatever.
What if you had a restaurant that wasn't about going there to get breads and cookies and whatever? It was just a completely gluten-free restaurant, and it just served all kinds of different things, just they happened to be gluten-free, right? It wasn't specifically for getting these, forbidden items that would be glutenful in normal situations, but like maybe there would be a lot of options that didn't have bread with them at all, or
there are a lot of cuisines that are not based on wheat.
Yeah.
The rice-based cuisines, corn-based cuisines,
Exactly. So
all those other wonderful grains.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think that would be more like what you would see in a culture where everybody was intolerant of that kind of thing. It wouldn't be like, well, there's this forbidden object that we have to go and eat in this particular way. It would just be like, food is normal, it just doesn't include this, right?
Yeah.
Which I think, yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Because honestly, yeah, because in a place where everybody was gluten intolerant, nobody would ever have cooked with gluten, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so you have to figure out what the norms are, in wherever this is, right? I mean, like, so you're in fiction. How much food do you feature in your fiction? Do people eat food in a scene, right? You want to make sure you have thought of a few things for people to eat. And
I love to cook, and I put food in all my world building.
that's right.
So in the Darkover books I write, there are wonderful descriptions because I'm really interested in describing delicious food or horrible food.
Mm-hmm.
And Marion never did that. I mean, her description of a meal would be like 3 words, and I go on for a paragraph.
Yeah.
Actually, horrible food is a great way to you can intensify tension, you can reveal character, you can have a plot twist if people get sick from it. Have you noticed that in epic fantasy, nobody ever gets food poisoning?
Oh my God, and they should be getting it all the time.
Yeah.
Or unless they're, of course, vultures.
Yeah.
I've got cooking and food in pretty much everything I write. There's going to be somebody who can't cook or doesn't like food, and somebody who does cook. You were saying about revealing character. There's you can show a relationship if there's wonderful food on the table, and some of the people are really enjoying it, and somebody says, "No, this is wrong with it, and this other thing is wrong with it," even though they know very well it isn't. Don't you agree? And then you sort of, how do you respond to that? Well, I don't agree. So there's the relationship that you can look at between those two people. How does the person who says, "But there's something wrong with it, why aren't you agreeing with me?" How do they respond to that?
Yeah.
And if they,
I'm also thinking of the use of water in Dune.
Sorry?
The use of water in Dune. In Frank Herbert's novel of the when they first come to Arrakis, and in the palace there's a fountain, and all of the noble guests will I think they wash their hands and then put the sopping towel on the floor or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the towels get squeezed and sold to water beggars, and so it's political power.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it is really. I mean, there's nothing. It's not food. You know, there's really hardly anything that doesn't involve food in our cultures, right? Like, you know, because you have to eat so often because you're a mammal. I mean, if you weren't a mammal, if you had like a snake people, they might have these big old feasts every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, oh my gosh, you know, we've been doing all our things for 3 weeks, but we have to return to the homestead because it's time to eat.
Right. And then they do nothing but sleep for 3 days.
Right. Like, I mean, yeah. I mean, that would be kind of cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I like reptiles.
I mean, so, and I have, in my novelette that I'm working on right now, I'm doing a kind of fun thing with food, because I was reading up on, you know, how wolves eat, and I don't actually eat all that often, in fact, considering. And so they have this thing they do if they're going to go on scouting trips, which is that they have this very particular meal that they eat, that's very sort of dense, like rich in calories, but not very big. And they eat that, and then they just go off, and they just don't eat for like a week. Right? So I'm like, okay, this will be fun to put in. Like, I don't have to worry about him eating while they're on the trip. I mean, human guy, yeah, he's got to eat. Everybody else is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what I decided to call it was Scout's Strength, which is the name of this special meal that you eat before you go out, you know.
Actually, what comes to mind then is what you eat, the composition of your meals and the frequency are going to affect the frequency with which you defecate, with which your body rids itself of solid waste. So I read someplace that horses poop like 4 times a day.
Oh, wow.
Which makes sense. Yeah, is that right? Yeah.
I would not be surprised by that. I don't know for sure. I'd have to look that up. But that sounds about right. Those things poop a lot.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we were on a horseback ride on our spring break, and I really think the person behind me had never been on a horseback ride before, because my horse started doing its thing, and she's like, ah! And I was like, sorry to just do that, you know. I mean, I can't tell it not to.
Right? Come on, horse, hold it.
I was actually speaking of food processing. Actually, this brings me back to food processing, strangely, because when we were in Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, they have this gigantic 16-sided barn that he built. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was super clever. It was a 2-story barn, and what they used it for was threshing wheat. And so so there was this big earthen rampway up to the 2nd floor. And the floor of the top section of the barn was actually these slats with gaps between them. Okay, now they weren't huge gaps, but you know, they were gaps. And what they would do is they would take their wheat harvest and bring it in and lay it all over this ground, right? And then they would bring horses in and basically trot them over the wheat to separate the wheat from the chaff, because then the heavy wheat grains would fall through the slats, and the big straw pieces would stay up on the floor.
Right.
But the key was that they had to keep the horses
From eating all the stuff, huh?
From eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were these very, like, I'm trying to remember what the method was that they used, but they had this very special way. They basically couldn't let the horses walk. They had to make sure that they were constantly trotting while they were in the barn, because
Right.
they can do it while walking, but not while trotting.
Actually, they can when they're trotting. I've even seen horses poop while they're cantering.
But I mean, they're worried about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, apparently, like, the likelihood of this happening goes way down.
Okay.
Okay. So this is what we were learning about. I'm like, wow, but like, food is such a complex thing. Like, it's this process, and people will come up with all kinds of really creative ideas for how to make it happen more easily, how to happen faster, how to save time in various ways. I mean, obviously, there's make the slaves do it, which was George Washington's approach for much of this, but I mean, even then, you did have these very specific sort of effort-saving steps that were being taken, right? So that's really, yeah. When you're working in a fictional world, you have to think through, like, where's the food coming from? How's it getting to where the people are eating it?
Mm-hmm.
Are they eating the same thing all the time? Because they kind of shouldn't, but there are circumstances in which people do eat the same thing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but you don't want to do research on your historical period and discover that the thing that people usually ate was this, and then serve it at every meal.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't really like to eat the same thing all the time. They might eat it consistently at the same time of day, right? But yeah, I mean, so eating the same thing all the time is a product of, I don't think it's just a product of grocery stores, Che. I think it's partly you have a very reliable agricultural product, and that's what you got, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to find different kinds of things to do with it, right?
Yeah.
But
I'm just saying, like, we can conceivably, you can go to the grocery store and find XXX fruit and vegetables all year long.
Well, that's true.
Really
That's true.
reliably. And same with, like, the box foods, processed foods, meat counter, etc. You can go and you're like, I need chicken, but you never have to worry that this week they're not going to have chicken.
Right, I hear you on that. No, it's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point. But I think, honestly, if you have to be very careful with food repetition in fiction, I think, because people are going to notice it, and they're going to be like, why are they always eating?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, like, really, have we had enough of those yet?
Yeah, but then there might be some variation, within families. If you're, if you're 6, then some 6-year-olds go through a stage where all they eat is peanut butter, or all they eat is eggs or bread and jam. Small badgers.
Like, you go through food phases when you're a little kid.
Yeah, but there are also other things.
When you're a kid, I go through food phases as an adult, but they're usually not exclusive food phases. There's just a period of time where I really, really like to eat apples and blue cheese for lunch, and I do it for 3 weeks, and then I'm done.
But sometimes people will go through, an autistic person, particularly if they're under a lot of stress in other areas, will say, I need to have this food every day for the stability that I need in my life right now. That's the thing can be stable.
Right. And people can also be very sensitive to food texture.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a thing that happens in this house. You know, this she loves this particular food, but she can't eat it right now because she's very sensitive to textures at the moment. You know, at some other stage, less stressful part in her life, she can eat that. There's, you know, hot peppers, but sometimes you just can't.
Yeah.
So no, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
So there's an interaction between stability, routine, predictability, reliability in food and in meals, and in novelty, variety. I mean, most human beings are stimulated by something that's different or exotic, which is why we love to try cuisines from different countries. Or, oh God, not eggs and toast for breakfast again.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are people who are terrified of that, who will never try anything new. I know someone who moved in with a friend and her mother for financial reasons, I guess. But and she loves to cook. She loves to eat interesting things, and she discovered a thing that I guess she didn't know was that the people she was living with eat meat and potatoes and nothing else. And if she wants to make something else, they won't eat it. So she's just cooking for herself and not have a meal together.
You can have a meal concurrently.
Yeah, which is not the same thing.
Right.
You're eating completely different things. If you've got somebody at the table who can only or will only eat one thing or can only not eat one thing, but the rest of the meal is very similar. They're eating the same thing. That gives it, I think, more of a cohesive feeling of a meal that you are eating together. Whereas,
and I'm going to actually, since we're talking about these issues of tastes and particularities and individual needs and stuff like that, there's my brain just short-circuited. Oh, right. There was an article that I read. It was actually a discourse analysis kind of article. But so what it was doing was it was analyzing mealtime conversation. And specifically, it was analyzing the talk about food that happens at the table during a meal. And it was fascinating because if you actually record people during a meal, you discover that they talk about food in different ways, and there are all kinds of, there's not just this is great or whatever. There's also a lot of controlling language, depending on the family, surrounding how one is supposed to eat, what one is supposed to eat, whether eating is a shameful thing. There's all kinds of complex, layered meanings over the food that happens in the conversation during the meal. And that's something to think about, because I don't see a lot of that. Like people tend to sit down to meals in fiction and talk about how to kill the ruler, or let's sit down and talk about where we're going on our trip tomorrow. But
another culture clash there.
There's less talk about the actual food, which I think is of course we're concerned with the plot, right? But you can actually make the food serve the plot, right? Because it can serve the characters. it can advance the character relationships so much, and that can contribute to the plot. So, yeah, I mean, so yes, you don't want to have them just sit down at the table and not talk about whatever it is that needs to be driving the story forward at any given time, right?
How to change the subject. Well, we need to approach the encroachment of the barbarians in this way, and someone else at the table says, "Wow, this meat is cooked perfectly," and the rest of the table says, joins in on that, and hopes that this person understands that this is a subtle way of saying, "Shut up." We're not doing that till after dinner.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not time to talk about that. Let's talk about food.
Yeah.
Or the way your friend starts to say, "Oh yeah, and that party we're gonna have," and you're changing the subject because the other people at the table don't know about the party yet, and you want to just
right,
stop that because they're about to give something away, whether it's something innocuous like a surprise party or an assassination attempt that is being bungled because the person you're talking to doesn't realize that the target is at the table.
Yeah.
So meal times are an occasion for conversation between groups of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are a lot of times when a meal is part of, I don't know, I'm thinking of like a wedding eve dinner, or a betrothal dinner, or family reunion dinner. Oh my God, can you do stuff with that?
Yep.
Not to mention. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to cut out early because I have an appointment later. But thank you all. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you for being here.
We'll try next week.
All right.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
yay!
See ya.
Thank you for coming. That's cool.
That's awesome. So yes. Actually, I was seeing something like there are actually groups who put out lists of here's how you should talk to your crazy uncle over Thanksgiving about the following political topics.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and political topics that are actually personal topics, like please stop talking about gay people that way.
Yeah.
Not wanting to actually come out over the coffee and cake.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Meals are complicated times and situations.
Yeah. And yeah. And we've mentioned that we don't even know how many, you can change how many you have per day or per week or whatever it is,
And I think also, on the flip side of that, what if you have a culture where everybody just takes their food to, their own private corner and eats, and no one discusses anything because, you have to go eat in private? Or, because it's your share of the food. Where
eating is considered to be too personal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something you don't do in public or something.
Right,
also,
exactly. Well, you could. It's not hard to reinterpret it in such a way that you're like, well, sex is sicking something in holes in your body, and so is food.
Yeah.
It goes in private. Right? You could totally see why that would be the case in some kind of logical scenario, right? It's just about where you draw your category lines, right?
Yeah.
And the eating, okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of really interesting things I've seen in fiction recently with eating. One is in the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. She has a drink that you drink with people that you're getting together to have a meeting with, and it's called Safe. And it tastes terrible, but it's impossible to poison anybody with it. So that when you're getting together for a business meeting, that's what you serve because it's safe.
Oh my God! My question is, you have to drink it though.
Yeah, and I also think exactly. I always thought that was kind of. And then the other thing that I'd like to sort of note is that the Ancillary Justice books by Ann Leckie have some really interesting food things going on. And you know, you've got the sort of runny soldier leafy food called skell, but then you have also, you know, speaking of food as a plot point, you've got the Presger translators who come in, and in the 3rd book you have Presger translator Zayat, who's like eating all this weird stuff. And everybody's kind of appalled watching her eat. And it's like, oh my God. You know, like, she wants to drink the fish sauce. You know? It's not a drink, it's a condiment. Well, there's no reason why I shouldn't drink it, is there? Like, yeah, right? It's liquid. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny. And, you know, like, she eats a whole oyster with the shell. So you can totally do all kinds of interesting stuff that is plot related, right? And character related. I mean, all of that stuff. I think with the translators that stuff, one of the things that it does is you know, she looks very human. So all of the stuff that she does, I mean, well, she doesn't speak. She's very unusual. Her categorization systems are completely different, which is one of the things I just love about the way that these sort of quasi-aliens are portrayed, because they're not entirely human, but they're not entirely alien either. But one of the things that marks her as alien and has everybody kind of looking at her going, oh my gosh, is how she eats. And like the fact that she goes, do you eat food here? When she comes off the station, wow, do you eat food here? And they're and of course they're like, well, yes we do. and you know, she goes, something like, I can't remember verbatim, but it's like, well, so do you not eat food where you come from? She's like, well, I can't recall having eaten any food. So it becomes this really humorous thing, but also kind of eerie and definitely fascinating, and helps to keep things moving in the story. So
yeah.
Sorry, I suddenly forgot to write notes, so I've got to make
That's okay.
Things down there.
Yeah.
But culture clash is very interesting. The cultural interaction you're talking about there, and even the food requirements and restrictions. You know, walking into somebody's house and, you know, they've invited you for dinner. Who's responsible? Is anybody responsible for making sure that the guest can eat what's being served?
God, I run into that.
Are you responsible for saying,
right,
please tell me if there's anything that I can't or should not offer you?
Right, and of course, you know, it's like, well, how much behind the scenes stuff has to happen in order for the meal to go off correctly? Because when we invite over our gluten-free friends, let me tell you, we gotta be on the ball.
Yeah, right? But you need to know that they're gluten-free, so you have to
and actually
find that out outside the context of an invitation to meal.
Right, exactly. And the other thing is, and if a person just has preferences, right?
Yeah.
You know, what are the politeness rules surrounding indicating your preferences before you go to somebody's house? Because, like, for example, is it polite for you to just show up with your own meal in your bag? right?
Yeah.
Because you're pretty sure you're not going to be able to eat whatever is there. Will the host be offended?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or is it less polite to call up the host in advance and say, I have the following list of preferences / allergies / whatever, and here's what you have to cook for me, right? It's a hard one because it's like, well, one way or another.
Because then it looks like you're just picky and demanding and maybe some kind of food snob.
Right. And
that they have to go to some
relationship
special
you have.
effort to make something you can eat.
And how often it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, like, if this person's coming over for one meal and then you're never going to see them again, hey, they can bring their food, right? But maybe if you're going to have a long-term relationship and they're going to be over a lot and whatever, you might want to say, I'd really like to be able to serve you something that you can eat.
Mm-hmm.
Something.
Yeah, that can backfire depending on how good they can cook, too.
Well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
You can cook and whether you're allowed to tell them that this is inedible or whatever.
Yeah, I've had the worst food at various times, mostly at relatives' houses. I have actually found people not related to me more accommodating, interestingly, than
I have eaten some food that I would never be caught dead eating in my own life. Like food that is just bad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about allergies or whatever. I'm just, I've eaten food that tasted really bad to me in the name of politeness on multiple occasions.
Salted carrot shreds. Oh, dear Lord. Salted carrot shreds. And the woman was trying to she was using me as a test case. She couldn't cook. She knew she couldn't, but she needed to test out what she planned to make for her boyfriend. And I didn't know how to say. I mean, it was my host family. It was someone related to my host family when I was in Cuernavaca. And, between being a guest, not wanting to be rude, and not really having the language to say anything subtly, anything more
Right.
graceful than, dear God, salted carrot shreds. I just sort of ate and nodded and said, I'm full now. I'm trying to figure out how to say that, because I could say I don't speak the language. I could say I go dancing. I don't want to go dancing. I could even say I'd like a beer, but that. So that's there's a language issue there.
Yeah.
But also, I think, Juliet, you posted a while back about testing people's food allergies. Well,
Oh yeah, no,
you're
like
not allergic.
like trying to
nuts,
fool
you
them
just-
into eating something
don't
because
like
you
them.
think they don't. Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
that's the danger zone, and you can kill people. So don't.
Yeah. Yeah, but you might have somebody who feels that way, as a host, and not knowing what they've done to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, you fed the ambassador and shrimp because you thought that they were kidding. Did you mean to assassinate the ambassador? Or
Right.
are you just a fool?
Yeah.
Or was it because, sometimes things do sneak in, like the ingredients of ingredients
Yeah.
Yes.
are things you might not know. If something is like, oh, this is this thing that's in fish stock.
Yeah.
And you're
yeah,
like, oh, okay, that's okay. But then there's shrimp in the fish stock and you're like deathly allergic to shellfish.
Right.
But people weren't even thinking.
Processed in a factory that also processes peanuts.
Yeah.
Or even, the source, if you get you get, well, the paste and honey differs from the location and from the plants.
Sure.
Or
and, and like in the gluten-free world, natural flavors has gluten in it.
Yeah.
Like gluten is not always called gluten or even wheat. Yeah. It's a whole process.
Even with something simple as cream, which of course is dairy, so not simple for some people, what the cows eat. So also, location is this a sweeter cream or fattier cream, or sweeter because the location fattier is going to be. Well, it also depends. Might depend on the milk that's being given. So
yes,
adjusting
as a person who went off dairy because I was nursing my daughter, who was at that time very allergic to dairy.
Oh.
Yep.
Wow.
I went off dairy completely for a year because I was nursing my daughter.
That's a thing that would never have occurred to me. That's a thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, on that note, we're over time. I let us go over time a little bit because I'm not running off anywhere, and I figure, we started late. So
that's only like 9 minutes anyhow.
Yeah, no biggie, right? But thank you all for being here, and next week we're supposed to have a guest, but I am having a little bit of difficulty working out the timing, so I will be in touch. We may have to reschedule it for another week, in which case we will go to subconscious world building as a topic. But so I don't want to set up expectations and then have them defeated. I will just tell you that it's going to be TBA because I need to work out a few timing things with my author. And hopefully everything will work out, and we'll see you next week. Okay? I'm going to stop the broadcast.